This is Seoul. 25 million people live in and around it, roughly half of South Korea, packed into one of the richest, most modern cities on the planet. Glass towers, subways, semiconductor fortunes. And it sits only about 40 kilometers from one of the most heavily armed borders on Earth, close enough that, from the mountains on the far side, you could reach it with a cannon. For 70 years, North Korea has kept that cannon pointed at the city. Not a missile, not a nuclear bomb. Ordinary artillery. Roughly 1,000 old guns and rocket launchers dug into caves in the hills north of the border, aimed at the heart of a metropolis of 25 million people. Pyongyang has promised, over and over, to turn Seoul into a sea of fire. And here is the strange part. Those guns are, in a real sense, North Korea's most powerful weapon. More useful, day to day, than its nuclear bombs. Because they do not have to be fired to work. They hold an entire city hostage. And a hostage does not have to be shot to control the room. This is the story of how 1,000 aging artillery pieces froze one of the world's most dangerous standoffs in place, why nobody can simply take them out, and why the real threat is not how many they could kill. It is that no one can ever be sure. Let us start with the geography, because the geography is the whole problem. Seoul is a border city. The demilitarized zone that separates the two Koreas runs just to its north, and the heart of the capital sits only around 40 kilometers away. That is closer than many people live from their own airport. Into that small space, South Korea has concentrated about half its population and a huge share of its economy. One of the most valuable cities on Earth was built and then grew into a giant, right at the edge of a line that two armies have stared across since the 1950s. You cannot move Seoul, and you cannot move the border. So for 70 years, the city has lived inside the range of the guns on the other side. That single fact, proximity, is the foundation of everything that follows. So what exactly is on the other side of that line? North Korea has one of the largest artillery forces in the world, on the order of 20,000 guns and rocket launchers. That number gets quoted a lot, and it is genuinely enormous. But most of those weapons cannot actually reach Seoul from North Korean soil. They simply do not have the range. The ones that matter are the long-range tubes positioned near the border, and there are far fewer of them. The usual estimate is somewhere between 500 and 700 pieces close enough to strike the Seoul area, roughly double the number North Korea had in the mid-1990s. And they come in a few main types. The first is the Koksan, a monster of a self-propelled gun firing a 170mm shell. It is North Korea's longest-range cannon. A standard shell reaches about 40 kilometers, which is just enough to touch the northern edge of Seoul from firing positions near the border. With a rocket-assisted shell that stretches to around 60 kilometers, pushing deeper into the city. Then there are the rockets. 240mm multiple-launch rocket systems, of which perhaps 200 launchers are thought to be aimed at Seoul. Each one can salvo dozens of rockets in a matter of minutes. And newer, larger 300mm rockets can fly around 200 kilometers, far enough to reach well beyond the capital to targets across the south. But the numbers are only half the story. The other half is where the guns live. Along the hills north of the border, North Korea has spent decades carving artillery positions directly into the mountains. They are called hardened artillery sites. A gun sits inside a cave, protected by solid rock. When it is time to shoot, it rolls forward to the mouth of the cave, fires, and then withdraws back into the mountain to reload, safe from return fire. Then it rolls out and does it again. There are thought to be hundreds of these sites, many of them within 60 kilometers of Seoul. They are difficult to spot from satellites. They are protected by air defenses behind them, and they are built to survive exactly the kind of bombardment you would use to try to silence them. This is not a line of guns sitting in the open. It is a mountain range that shoots back. And the volume they can generate is the real menace. In the opening minutes of a barrage, the launchers massed near the border could put many thousands of shells and rockets into the air, faster than any defense could hope to catch them. This is not purely theoretical either. In 2010, North Korean artillery shelled a South Korean island called Yeonpyeong, killing 4 people, including 2 civilians, and wrecking homes. The guns have fired before, at people. Everyone in the region remembers it. Which brings us to the question everyone actually wants answered. If those guns opened fire on Seoul, how bad would it really be? And here is where the story gets genuinely surprising. Because the honest answer is that nobody knows, and the expert estimates disagree with each other by a staggering margin. At the alarming end, some analyses have suggested that a heavy bombardment could cause enormous casualties. A widely reported study estimated that a full artillery attack could produce more than 200,000 casualties. Another major analysis from the Rand Corporation modeled a 1-hour barrage and came out with a range running from a few thousand casualties all the way up to around 200,000, depending on the assumptions. But look closer at that range, and something important appears. The high numbers only show up under the most extreme assumptions, thousands of guns firing at once, straight into the densest neighborhoods, with no one taking cover. Other careful studies land far lower. The Nautilus Institute estimated that a barrage aimed at military targets might cause a few thousand casualties in the opening minutes, and one aimed deliberately at the city, tens of thousands. And a number of analysts argue that even those figures are too high, that a realistic death toll in an opening strike might be closer to a few thousand, not hundreds of thousands. Why the huge gap? Because artillery is not a precision weapon. It is inaccurate area fire, most of it exploding on streets and rooftops rather than inside packed buildings. Seoul has decades of civil defense, shelters, and a subway system that doubles as one of the largest bomb shelters on Earth. And the moment those guns open fire, they reveal their positions and begin to be destroyed by counter-battery radar and air power. The barrage does not go on forever. It degrades hour by hour. So the picture that emerges is not a city instantly flattened. It is something more complicated and in a way more unsettling. A terrifying opening salvo, real mass casualties, panic in a city of 25 million, followed by a grinding battle to silence the guns. Bad enough to be unthinkable. But not the total annihilation the phrase sea of fire suggests. And that gap between the terror and the reality is exactly where the weapon does its work. Because here is the thing about the uncertainty. You cannot run the experiment. No leader in Seoul or Washington can ever be sure whether an attack would kill 2,000 people or 200,000. And when the low end of your estimate is a massacre and the high end is a catastrophe, the exact number stops mattering. The mere possibility is enough to make anyone hesitate. Uncertainty is not a weakness of the threat. It is the threat. Which leads to the second question. If these guns are such a problem, why not simply destroy them before they can fire? On paper, that is the obvious move. In practice, it is very close to impossible, and understanding why is the key to the whole standoff. To disarm the artillery, you would have to find and destroy hundreds of hidden, hardened, mobile firing positions spread across a mountain range, protected by air defenses, all at more or less the same instant, before they could get off their first shots. You would need perfect intelligence on where every gun was, perfect weapons to dig them out of solid rock, and the ability to do it all in the few minutes before the shooting started. No military on Earth can promise that. And simply finding them is a problem in its own right. In peacetime, many of these cave positions are nearly invisible, indistinguishable from ordinary hillside. Some are only ever revealed the first time they fire. You would be trying to destroy an enemy you cannot fully see, and every gun you miss gets a vote. And the consequences of getting it wrong are immediate. The instant the first bomb falls on North Korea, the surviving guns fire. Not in an hour, not after a debate. Right away. Counter-battery radars will start locating them. Aircraft will start hunting them. And over hours and days, the artillery will be ground down. But not before the opening salvos have already landed on Seoul. There is no version of a first strike that keeps the city safe. This is why the artillery casts such a long shadow over everything else, including the nuclear program. Imagine a perfect operation that destroyed every North Korean nuclear site. Even then, the guns would remain. Destroying the bombs while Seoul burns is not a victory anyone can sell. So the artillery does not just protect North Korea. It protects the nukes too, by making the price of any strike unbearable. Which brings us to the last piece, and the real point of the whole story. Analysts sometimes call North Korea's artillery a poor man's nuclear deterrent. And that is exactly right. It is a conventional force that does the job of a strategic one. It holds a great city hostage, and by doing so, it makes a first strike on North Korea effectively unthinkable. It did this job for decades before the North had a single working nuclear weapon, and it still does it today. The mechanism is pure hostage logic. Seoul cannot be moved out of range. The guns cannot be reliably destroyed. So both sides are locked into a standoff where the opening hour of any war is guaranteed to be a horror, and everyone knows it. That knowledge, more than any treaty, is what has kept the peninsula frozen and quiet for 70 years. Not peace, exactly. A balance of terror, with a city as the collateral. South Korea knows it cannot rely on this forever. It is racing to build its own defenses, a layered interceptor system sometimes called the Korean Iron Dome, meant to swat down incoming shells and rockets. But even its designers do not claim it could stop a full barrage. It is a patch on a problem that has no clean solution, because the problem is not really the guns. It is the geography. And the threat is not quietly fading with age. As recently as 2026, North Korea announced a new generation of artillery aimed squarely at Seoul. Pyongyang does not treat these guns as relics. It treats them as the core of its leverage, worth upgrading decade after decade, precisely because they still work. The lesson of Seoul reaches far beyond one border. It is that the most powerful weapon in a standoff is often not the one that does the most damage, but the one that can never be safely removed. 1,000 aging cannons, many of them older than the people they threaten, have quietly shaped the decisions of presidents and generals for 3 generations without firing a shot in anger at the city. Because a hostage does not have to be harmed to be effective. It only has to be within reach. And for 70 years, 25 million people have lived their entire lives inside the range of guns they will probably never see, holding a fragile peace in place simply by being there.